Hi, my name is Anderson Matlock, and I have been a fan of Wicked my entire life. Started with back when I was in high school, so it was published in 1995. I probably got my hands on it about 1999, to be honest. Um, I wasn't quite mature enough to be reading novels like this back then, but when I did, I absolutely fell in love. So the original book, Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West by Gregory Maguire, was an amazing book that just absolutely rocked my world and my understanding and my comprehension of the world around me. And then from there, obviously in 2003, I graduated high school in 2002. And in 2003, Wicked, the musical, ended up taking the world by storm, to be perfectly honest with you. It wasn't immediately available. It's not something that everybody absolutely loved. Make a dog down here. And it kind of started off slow before, it was tested in San Francisco before it ended up going up to New York. There's videos about the history of how the Wicked musical came about, and the stories and the intrigue and everything, and how incredible that show is, and the actors that made it happen, and the production, everything, the costuming. With that said, that obviously has provided the world with a lot of knowledge about what Wicked is to the mainstream media. But what is not something that I was able to find a lot online, YouTube, websites, things like that, was information or, some kind of analytical literature analysis of the actual original Maguire book. Or the series in general. You get a lot of information about Wicked itself, the first book, but it's actually a series of 4 books of the Wicked years, and then there's a spin-off series of 3 books, all kind of starting with Elphie and, the witches, and working its way towards, her son, her granddaughter, and the lives that they've lived, and how they all kind of work together to kind of make this mythos of her legacy. And with that, I was kind of I'm a lore hound. I want information. I want to get my hands on, details, little tiny things like symbols and there's side stories in here that you're like, wait, I want to know more about that. And so I really, I took a deep dive, and there's not actually a lot on the internet. Whether that's YouTube, whether that's on Google, just looking for random blogs that people have put together, there actually isn't a lot. There's some book reviews. They're like 8 to 30 minutes long. And they're usually just people giving their overall general opinion of what it is, but not a literary analysis of the actual meat and potatoes, the subject matter of the novels themselves. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a moment to create. I'm going to create one big video and chop it up. And I took a little bit of time to kind of I just did another read through. Of course, I read it a long time ago. I've probably read it like 3 or 4 times in my life. And I just actually did an audiobook review of it while I'm walking around, driving, things like that, listening to the audiobook again. And it just got me thinking, there's a lot of subject matter in there that's very, very valuable and important and interesting. And I wanted to, with the hype that's going to be coming, the hype that's already here for the movie that's coming out in, 7 days, 10 days, something like that. It's the 17th right now, and it's coming out November 22nd. So with the hype around this film, and of course, what's going to happen afterward, we're all going to fall in love with it. It's a 2-part movie. So we're getting part 1 now, and I think 2025 we're getting the next one. So with all that happening, there's going to be people that are going to want to know, what is this book about? First of all, this book is nothing like the Broadway musical. The musical is a high level, it's like a glorified, inspirational, think of it like music. It's the melody, right? But the book has the harmonies that go with it, and the discord, and all of the different elements that make this world more robust than just a Broadway musical, the Disneyfied version. And so the book is far more resonant with the overall themes of what, Gregory Maguire was trying to explain, that did not make it into the Broadway musical by any means. In fact, the musical, originally, he actually didn't like it. And then, as he started to see how the crowds were reacting, it was reported that he was like, all right, it's grown on me. And of course, now it's a huge, huge thing. And, this is like his cash cow, but ultimately his books are something completely different. It's a completely different universe of political intrigue and maneuvering and politics and socioeconomic differences between the upper class and the lower class, and racism, prejudice, bias, all these other things. And so I'm going to kind of break those down, and that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to do one long video and then chop it up into little bit pieces. So the first part that I want to talk about is the overarching theme of otherness. And so obviously, you can tell by the cover art. Let me use the other one. It's the same. So the original cover art for the musical, which is what this is, was actually supposed to be like an element of yin and yang, the good and the wicked. But that is the overarching theme. That's why it's called Wicked. Why do we call her the Wicked Witch of the West? In the musical, there's a really great quote that Glinda offers at the beginning of the play, and she says, "Are people born wicked, or do they have wickedness thrust upon them?" After all, she had a mother, she had a father, as so many do. And that's the opening to the Broadway musical, but that's really kind of the element of the book that brings up those questions of what actually makes somebody evil or bad or good, for that matter. So when we're on the topic of otherness, so I want to talk about social ostracism, people being isolated or separated out from the main group for one reason or another, prejudice and confirmation bias. So obviously we know what prejudice is. It's a common topic in the world right now about the color of somebody's skin, and the main point of this is that she is green. She's not Caucasian like everybody else. Funny enough, I don't recall there ever being people of color in the book. They don't really talk about it other than Fiyero and people from the Vincas. But with that said, skin color is a huge topic of this because it's about, the phrase I use is confirmation bias, because that's exactly what it is. People look at her, they see green, and just start making assumptions. When she's born, her own parents say that she's green as sin, and that plays into some stuff later on. But the ultimate point of her being green is the fact that she is of another colored skin than the norm. And that obviously is going to have some, allegorical implications to African-American people in the United States or worldwide. And the attitudes toward how people perceive whether, they're inferior or superior to one another. And just as kind of a point of note, too, that I made here, the Wicked musical actually has kind of a bad track record of having women of color playing the main character, Elphaba. I think that there's one black woman that played the role, and I think it was in the West End. It wasn't even in the United States. It was the West End. I think that they've had some women of color playing like in other places, like in Korea, and as understudies, but not as the primary. With that said, too, is there's this presumed inferiority because she's not like us. She's different. There's something wrong with her. She's broken. She's busted. And, she's spoiled for, and they say that a couple times in the book, that she's spoiled like cabbage. She's green. She's, the spawn of a dragon. She's not quite right. And that's really the overarching theme, is that she has to live her life with this prejudice being pushed on her. And she has to figure out how to live her life and kind of accept that she's different and tolerate that prejudice that is being aimed toward her. And despite the fact that people consider her to be inferior or perceive her to be, ooh, she's not like us. She's not, like, we're superior to her because we're not green. She's actually the Throp third descending. And so as you get into the politics of the books, you learn that her grandfather is the eminent Throp, and he is effectively the ruler, de facto ruler of Munchkinland. Funny enough, they're not short like typical Munchkinlanders, and we'll talk about that in a second. But she is, it typically goes through the females of the family tree, and her mother is just kind of this aloof. She doesn't care. She doesn't want the title, but she actually prays that she's going to have daughters or sons, because if she has daughters, then they're going to inherit the eminency. And so she doesn't want to have daughters. So when she has Elphaba, well, Elphaba's green. Elphaba is the natural next in line to inherit after Melina. So I was thinking of Elden Ring. So Melina obviously dies in childbirth, giving birth to their brother, Shell. Shelter God, I think is his full name. And so she's no longer next in line. That makes Elphaba the next eminent Throp third descending, now second descending because her mom's dead. And with that said, she's the heiress. She's the inheritor, you know, the next in line for this, to be head of state for another country. And yet, because of the color of her skin, people are judging a book by its cover. With that said, also another character that is judged by the color of their skin would be Fiyero in the books. In the play, I think originally Leonora Butts had a tattoo, kind of like Mike Tyson style, and they had it removed because it didn't really play well. It didn't really fit with what they were trying to Anglicanize it, make it more whitewashed. But in the books, he's dark-skinned with blue diamond tattoos all over his body. It's actually a point where, like, at one point he wants to unbutton his shirt so that he can like seduce her and be like, hey, they go all the way down. But that's a huge thing. There later on in the book, actually, when Elphaba actually is speaking with Glinda after Fiyero has, oh, by the way, spoilers. Later on in the book, Elphaba actually is speaking with Glinda about, you know, the rumors that Fiyero was, you know, he was killed because of an angry husband. Hint, hint, you know, Galinda's husband took out Fiyero because the rumor was that they were sleeping together. And Galinda's, you know, she didn't do it on purpose, but her natural response is, I would never, he's dark-skinned. And it's kind of that prejudice that persists throughout the book, that they just see this as normal. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with being so, like, oh, they're not like us. We can't invite them in. It's very exclusive. And it isolates them. So when we're talking about the topic of otherness, skin color is a huge, huge theme throughout the entire book and throughout the entire series, honestly. In the later books, so Son of a Witch, which comes after Wicked, Lear is not born green, but his daughter is. And so there's some questions about their lineage. Is Elphaba his mother? Is she not? Is Fiyero the father? Is he not? And then obviously his daughter ends up being green, so spoiler alert there. But with that said, also talking about that prejudice, that confirmation bias, that because he is dark-skinned, he must be lower class, when in fact he also is a head of state. He is a Arjiki prince of the Vinkus. So the Vinkus is separated into little like warring clans, and he is the prince of one of the strongest ones, with Kiamo Ko, a former waterworks like bastion. His father had taken that as, you know, taken that in a war, and turned it into their seat of power. So he's effectively the leader of another country, with Elphaba being a leader of another country, and yet these people are treating them like they're ingrates, like they're not worthy of admiration and the social status in which they were born into. So going from going from colors of the skin into actual race. So in addition to people just being different colored skin, we have different races, different like species even. So first of all, there's the quadlings, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but the quadlings are effectively described as being more comfortable on all fours. Their bodies are humanoid, but lanky, you know, gangly, and they refer to them as like frog-like. They live in the swampy southern region next to they're kind of like in the mountainous regions close to Munchkinland, south of the Emerald City. They go over the geography, that's why I know that. But, you know, so the first quadling that we ever come into contact with is Turtleheart. And the funny thing about that is we're introduced to this character almost as a sexy character. The way that he's described, it's in a moment of weakness. Melina, Elphaba's mother, is kind of like, she's stir crazy because Frexbar, her husband, is a minister of the Unionist faith. And he's out preaching, and she's home alone, and she's got this really ugly green baby with sharp, like shark teeth, because she was born with not human teeth. They were like animals, like a little demon. And so Turtleheart is just kind of wandering, and she is feeling gracious and invites him in, and they have some food, and she's just sitting there like, oh, hot and bothered. And they end up hooking up. And so through this situation that has created itself, now Elphaba's mother is being naughty with one of these quadlings named Turtleheart. Frexpart actually ends up coming home from one of his little teaching expeditions, um, and he's quite satisfied with himself, and he learns that Turtleheart's been there, keeping her happy, and he notices that she's happy, and he's happy that she's happy. And so he also welcomes Turtleheart into the family, and then Turtleheart ends up staying. And as we learn on later in the book, Frex actually admits that he saw Turtleheart as his lover as well. And so part of the topic of that is that Nessa Rose, her sister, the Wicked Witch of the East, is she Frex's daughter, or is she Turtleheart's daughter? We know Melena's the mother, she gave birth to her, but who's the father? And Frex's understanding is, I'm kind of glad that we don't know who the father is, because that makes her both of ours. And then he takes it another step further and says that if he is the father, then Nessa is the gift that Turtleheart gave to both me and Melina. And so, while unrequited, that we know of, it's not documented, Frex was also in love with Turtleheart, affectionately. And so, with this understanding that both of them are kind of endeared to this, sexy character, but the way they describe him in the book is kind of animalistic, frog-like. And it's hard to reconcile those two concepts of frog-like, this like what we would, that again, confirmation bias, what we would consider ugly. And yet these people are turned on by this appearance of this gentleman. And he is, and they do say that they are just human enough to be considered human. So we have another race that's not quite Caucasian human or humanoid. And then we have Munchkinlanders. So Munchkinlanders, as we all know from The Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland. I don't know where my dog is. Here he is. As we all know from the original Wizard of Oz film with Judy Garland, the Munchkinlanders are little people. Tiny, diminutive human beings. They are not tall. And so they actually go into there's a couple people that are like, wait a minute, you're from Munchkinland, but you're tall. And there's like two separate castes. Again, we have this division of the classes. But, the ruling class of Munchkinland have interbred with the people of the Gillikin, the people of the North, or the Emerald City, and have bred into them the height of a normal human being. And so these upper class Munchkinlanders are normal human tall people, whereas the lower class Munchkinlanders are diminutive, tiny. And so again, we have this racial caste system. It's kind of poverty versus wealth. It's a little bit of, species segregation. Obviously skin color, as we talked about, but wealth is really kind of where things kind of boil down to, especially as we move on into the story, as Elphaba goes to Shiz. Now, it doesn't start with Elphaba going to Shiz, the story of how she gets there or anything like that. We actually take the story away once we're done with Elphaba's childhood, which we get more into. And there's a new future book coming that should hopefully give us a little bit more information about her life as well, growing up. But it actually takes over from Galinda's point of view. So we fast forward to, they're adults, so they're like teens, let's say like 16, 17, 18. And Glinda is on a train. And on this train, she is forced to sit with this goat with a capital G. And they make a very specific, in the book, a very specific differentiation between animals with a lowercase a and animals with a capital A. Animals with a capital A have a soul, or they have intelligence. They have they have an ability to communicate, whereas normal animals with a lowercase a are just kind of livestock. They have no soul to what they're saying. And Dr. Dillamond is a goat. He's fully dressed, communicating in English words, and he asks Glinda to get his ticket for the train. And she goes and hands it to him, and he's like, no, not to me, to the conductor, so they can stamp it. I don't have opposable thumbs. And so this is introducing us to the differences, obviously, but her reaction to how people of her class respond to this otherness, this non-human, period, version of consciousness. You know, they're effectively citizens, but they're not human. And so she's judgmental. She has that confirmation bias. She is prejudiced against him. And you know, in a way, for no reason at all, and that's the whole point of prejudice, is that for no reason at all, she is disgusted by him. You do get a lot of that in the play because that is one of the major plot points that they use to kind of progress the story of Elphaba and why she's radicalized and, you know, becomes wicked because she's standing up for her own moral opinions and against the commonly appreciated politics of the wizard's regime. So you have this division of wealth. So Dr. Dillamon is actually wealthy. He can afford to ride a train because they actually made his fare much more expensive as a way to limit animals from traveling on public utilities like a train. And so he had the money because he is a professor at Shiz. And so, but despite the fact that he can afford the same train ride that she's on, she does not consider him to be in the same social or financial class as her. She has a pedigree and he's just a beast. So again, we're talking about otherness. So we're talking about Dr. Dillamon. Dr. Dillamon and the story around him, his plot is the catalyst that takes the story from just a normal like coming of age story to political activism and you know, this rhetoric that revolves around, you know, what makes somebody choose against their own, you know, desire to kind of fit in. Why would they choose to do something that is against the grain? And that's ultimately what happens. The whole point is somebody wicked, born wicked, or do they have wickedness thrust upon them? That's what Elphaba is struggling with, and that is what what Galinda was trying to say, is that Elphaba didn't choose to be wicked. She had it thrust upon her because she was forced to make an impossible decision to go with the current flow or to go against the flow and stand up for what she believed in was wrong. And Dr. Dillamon is the catalyst for that. So when we talk about otherness, her otherness is what she uses to empathize with what Dr. Dillamon goes through and what happens to him, to encourage her to take that story to the next step, to go against the wizard and defy gravity. With that's also later on in the book, towards the end, we also come into contact with another animal. She's an elephant, and she is actually magicked to look like a human until she chooses to shed the illusion. And her name is Princess Nastoya, and she is actually the leader of one of the other Arjiki tribes, and actually an ally with the Vinkus tribe she's another tribe, not Arjiki. Arjiki is where Fiyero is the prince, the head of state. And Princess Nastoya is one of the allies, another of the warring tribes that are friendly to his tribe. And so you have some interactions with her, and that's one of the things that makes the Princess Nastoya feel comfortable in trusting Elphaba and saying, if you ever need anything, please call for me. And she gives her these crows. Which the crows tie into the movie, the original L. Frank Baum, you know, inspired Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland. You know, there's the crows and all the animals that she throws at Dorothy as she's coming up the staircase to Kamiko and that whole thing. So, you know, Gregory Maguire has taken these elements of that story and kind of given them a little bit of history, a little story, a little lore. So Princess Nastoya gives her these crows and says, call me whenever you need me, I'll be there. Which doesn't end up happening. But so we're talking about like they're kind of sisters in arms against the established authority. Because part of the politics of the Gregory Maguire universe is that the wizard is actually trying to take over or ethnically cleanse or put people into camps in the Vinkus. So they're kind of like at odds with the wizard themselves. And then one other one I wanted to point out too is another interaction that Elphaba has. It's actually quite telling about how Munchkinland is handling the separation of animals versus animals. And in fact, the animals with souls end up being put back into the livestock. And so in order to trade with Nessa Rose to have Nick Chopper's axe cursed to prevent him from running off with a handmaid, this farm owner gives Nessa Rose some sheep and a cow. And Elphaba hates it. She's like, how do you know if they're sheep or if they're sheep? And, you know, that's a big theme throughout the book, is that every time she hears about an animal in some kind of cruel situation, whether that's for food, whether that's being used to pull a cart, you know, whether that's to be milked, she's like, how do you know that these aren't animals with souls? Why would you do that? How can you tell? And this is a conversation she actually has quite often to antagonize people, because she wants people to really think, like, how would you feel if they did this to you? And most of them kind of have like this life response, like, it's not me, so I don't have to worry about it. And so she has a conversation with the cow that is being bartered for the curse against the axe. And she's having this conversation, and she's like, well, because Nessa Rose is the eminent Throp, because Elphaba has absconded and, you know, left, and she's missing. Everybody thought she was dead. So Nessa Rose is now in power, and she actually invites Elphaba to come back and, like, be one of my generals. You know, we're about to go to war. You know, we're seceding from the nation, you know, from Oz, and we're going to be our own independent country. And the wizard wants to come in and annex us back into his imperial domain. And so she's trying to, like, get her sister to come help her with that whole situation. Again, more political maneuvering. And she's having this conversation with the cow. She's like, well, my sister's the ruler, and I'm really technically the ruler. I let her have that position. So by my authority, you're free, cow, go. And the cow's like, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm going to go. Thank you for setting me free. And when they catch me and put me back and you see me on the plate, please do me a favor and choke on me. And that's really, like, it's an interesting concept, because even though she wants to set them free, unfortunately, it's just not possible. It's not real. You can't just choose to do whatever you want and nobody's gonna fight you on it. The reality of the cow is that I'm resigned to this. This is what I'm stuck doing. Again, the cow is not a humanoid Caucasian of high wealth clout status. And so, you know, nobody really questions where their food's coming from, but they very well could be. And so later on, they say that, you know, Elphaba is served a stew with cow in it, and she's just sick to her stomach because she knows. And then one last about this, you know, this topic of otherness, because we're almost to 30 minutes, is that there are other elements to this world that are other. That would be the wizard. We all know that he came from, you know, our world, Earth, on his hot air balloon, and he ends up going back after Dorothy comes from Kansas. He's like, oh, you're from my world. There's Yackle, which we'll talk about in one of the last sections, and the dwarf of the Time Dragon, and then, of course, Dorothy and Toto. And then what we come to learn later, spoiler alert again, is that Elphaba is born of both worlds, because her father is rumored to be the wizard, and there's some proof to that. So we're at 30 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off right there and start the next section.